Well, it is good to be back with you guys. It's been a while. Now they got two pastors. You just don't need me near as much. But that's all right. It's good to be back, and it's good to have my whole family. It's been a while since the entire crew has been here as well, with two kids in college and running all over the place and ministry at our own church. Sometimes when I'm here, they're back at our home church. But it worked out for everybody to be here today, which is great. And again, it's great to be back with you this morning. But obviously, be in prayer for your pastors as they're out and about and traveling. And Ian out in the Midwest, I don't know where Pastor Greg is right now, but having the best life. I'm going to share a story as we get started, and it'll lead into our message this morning. The year was 1866, and in a log cabin in the town of Franklin, Kentucky, Thomas Obadiah Chisholm was born. Everybody big fans of Thomas Obadiah? No, I don't know. I didn't know who he was either. When he was 27 years old, he went to a revival service, and he came to faith in Christ. And he became a Methodist minister for a brief time, and then later an insurance agent. But that's not of much note. But through his life, he wrote over 1,200 poems. And spent a lot of years ill. He had pretty poor health. Actually, though, it's not in here. I don't remember the exact year or exact age. Well, I guess I could do the math. He actually lived like 94 years old. But in his younger years, he had very poor health. And had often spent a lot of time, in poor health throughout his life. But during his life, he wrote those over 1,200 poems. In 1923, he sent a stack of poems to a man named William Runyon, who worked for Moody. And he was a musician for Moody. And he eventually, on a train ride, read through some of those poems, and one of them grabbed his attention, and he liked it. And sometime later, he set it to music. He wrote the music for it. And he published it just himself, not through any big publisher, kind of privately. But little did he know, it would become one of the most popular hymns of the 20th century. And later in his life, Thomas Chisholm, the one who wrote the words, penned this testimony. He said this: "My income has not been large at any time due to impaired health in the earlier years, which has followed me until now. Although I must not fail," I think life's been hard, never made much money, but although I must never fail to record here the unfailing faithfulness of a covenant-keeping God, and that he has given me many wonderful displays of his providing care, for which I am filled with astonishing gratefulness. Yeah, life's been hard, never made much money, had, hardship throughout my life, poor health. I must not fail to record here the unfailing faithfulness of a covenant-keeping God, and that he has given me many wonderful displays of his providing care, for which I am filled with astonishing gratefulness." And the words that he wrote and that this William Runyon put to music was the song "Great Is Thy Faithfulness." And again, one of my favorite songs or hymns, and if you're familiar, there's a great devotional called New Morning Mercies, and it's from that same passage. We're going to be in the book of Lamentations, chapter 3, maybe not the most common book to preach from or to read from, but the book of Lamentations, chapter 3, right after Jeremiah. So if you're struggling to find it, Isaiah, Jeremiah, the big books of prophecy, Lamentations comes right after that. Great is thy faithfulness. And again, maybe some well-known verses in the passage we'll be reading this morning, but not all of them, I imagine, are well-known, and maybe not much is known about the book of Lamentations, because I didn't know a whole lot about the book of Lamentations until I was preparing for this message. But if you get, I just mentioned the time frame, not the time frame, but the location in our Bible, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, so we can, might make sense that this was, most people believe, written by Jeremiah. There's some debate, but not only recent debate. For thousands of years, everybody thought it was written by Jeremiah, and it's still the main belief. But it definitely was written right in that time frame, towards the end of Jeremiah's ministry. It was written right at the end of the fall of Jerusalem. Jerusalem had been attacked for a long time by Babylon, and the city fell. 586 BC, so approximately 586 years before the birth of Christ, the city falls to Babylon. They'd been attacked for a long time, had been, kind of picking off all the other cities around Jerusalem and gradually kind of tightening the loop around Jerusalem to the point now where they've surrounded the city. It had been attacked for some time, possibly up to a couple of years of just, you can't get supplies in, people are struggling, and Babylon definitely has the control, and then the city falls in 586 BC. They finally breach the walls, they kidnap the king, attack. It took several weeks for them to kind of ransack the city, but left it just a heap of rubble and, burnt and all that. If you think of the book Nehemiah, that's the end result, is that they have to go back and try to rebuild the city. So imagine before that, the city falling, all the walls being broken down, buildings being torn down, all the things of worth being ransacked and stolen. That's the backdrop to this passage of the whole book of Lamentations. Quote here from a commentary as I was reading, just to get the picture here of how bleak it is. Within the city, the ever-tightening siege by Babylon's armies began unraveling the fabric of society. Things not just physically fell apart, society fell apart. Starving mothers ate their own children. Look, Lamentations 2:20 and 4:10. Idolatry flourished as the people cried out to any and every god for deliverance. They forgot the true God. They're, any god, every god, save us. We don't care, we'll cry out to any god. Paranoia gripped the people until they were willing to kill God's prophet, Jeremiah, as a traitor and spy just because he spoke the truth. They had tried to kill Jeremiah for speaking the truth. And why was this coming? Why was this? Obviously, we know Babylon was this evil empire and constantly was, attacking God's people. But God even used them as a tool. And that's what was happening here. God was using Babylon to bring about judgment because God's people had been in sin for year after year. And again, Isaiah preached about it. Jeremiah preached about it. Repent, turn back to God, come back to God. And they wouldn't. And so God used, even though it's still evil, God actually used them as a tool of his judgment. So I don't think any of you have lived, I know I have not lived through any circumstances like this. I've never been in a city as it's been overtaken by a foreign nation. I don't think you have either. So these circumstances, you might look at that and go, it sounds bad, but it doesn't mean anything to me. It doesn't reflect my real life, and I agree with that. But we all have hardship in our lives. Different hardships. And as I was thinking about what to preach, this being the last Sunday of a year, maybe for you, 2024 wasn't a great year. Maybe you look back and go, I can't celebrate a whole lot of things about 2024. I don't look about a lot of things positively. Maybe it's financial stress. Maybe conflict with a parent. Parents, conflict with children and battles in the home. Battles amongst extended family. Maybe Thanksgiving was a little rough. Christmas is rough because of conflict with extended family. Maybe it's fear that test that you had taken, that the results are going to come back positive when you get the call from the doctor. Maybe just your relationship with God this year has just felt distant, cold, stale. All kinds of conflict. Could be a million other things. But in the midst of lament, the sadness, the sorrow, this weeping out to God that Jeremiah does in this book. That's what Lamentations, to lament, to feel sorrow, to feel sad. In the midst of his lament, the prophet Jeremiah, yes, was able to point out all this bad stuff. Again, people were eating their own children. But he's able to point out that there's hope that is ours through God. In chapter 3, it's the middle, it's 5 chapters. It's kind of like a peak and then back down the other side. And 3 is kind of the highest, chapter 3 is the midpoint, the highest point of the book. And it's often entitled something about hope. My Bible here even puts this section of chapter 3, starting in verse 19, as his hope. There is hope. There's hope to be found. In the midst of suffering, in the midst of hardship, in the midst of, again, maybe a really rough year, there is hope. Hope for today, hope for tomorrow. Again, from this same commentary. Lamentations both mourns the fall of the city, the bad stuff, and offers reproof, instruction, and hope to its survivors. Yes, it's bad that the city has fallen and the suffering we've gone through and being taken into exile. But there's reproof, there's things we need to learn. instruction, things, to do better, but there's hope to be found. So like I said, that's the kind of the big picture of Lamentations. We're going to be in chapter 3, as I said, starting in verse 19, reading eventually to 27. Number one, what's the problem? What's the problem here? We'll read verses 19 and 20. Remembering mine affliction and my misery, the wormwood and the gall, my soul hath them still in remembrance, and is humbled in me. What's going on here? The author was living in this turmoil. Again, Jeremiah had lived through this ransacking of the city and the fact that it was just a time of hardship, a time of suffering, a time of struggle. And he's remembering it, looking back at it. And it says, my affliction and my misery. In other translations, it's described as impoverished homelessness. Just imagine being completely without a home, completely without a place to be, a place to survive, a place to live. In the midst of God's judgment, Israel was in just such bad shape. Things were bleak. Things were not good. It says there, again, this gets a little poetic, the wormwood and the gall. Wormwood and gall were just bitter poisons. So just you're living with this bitter poison in you. Remembering mine affliction and my misery, the wormwood, the gall, this bitterness surrounding me. My soul, it says, my soul hath them still in remembrance and is humbled in me. My soul is humbled in me. Just imagine, you got a big balloon, and then the balloon is just deflating. It's just my soul is humbled, just deflated. As we think about our circumstances, maybe you're feeling a little deflated, a little brought low, a little humbled, brought down. The hardships of this life, the hardships of this past year bring you down. When you think back, you don't think of much positive. Again, you might be able to point out a few things, but on a scale, the few positive things that you've lived through recently are way outnumbered by the bad stuff, by the negative, and you're brought low, you're brought down, you're living in lamentations right now, in sorrow and sadness. And as and my wife and I just last night were talking about this passage, talking about what I'd be preaching about, so we hadn't talked much about it, she brought to mind some good friends of ours. Their names are Andy and Amy, and we went to college with them. Actually, I knew Andy even before that, but we went to college together. We got married roughly the same time. We even had well, it was before he got married, but his apartment was near our apartment when we first got married, and his dad worked for Word of Life. His dad was a missionary with Word of Life when I was a teen, so I knew his dad a little bit. And anyway, we've been, and now we're Facebook friends because I live in Indiana. We live here in Pennsylvania, but they have 6 kids, and this last year, about a year and a half or so, they've been going through a really, really hard time. One of their daughters, they have 6 kids, one of their daughters got diagnosed with cancer, extremely aggressive brain cancer. And we've been watching their journey through this for the last year and a half, and she unfortunately passed away back in the spring, maybe winter. It's been almost a year. But it was 2024. It was this year. And she writes quite a bit on Facebook of just being honest, the struggling. This year has been the year of everything's the first birthday since Sophie passed away, the first Thanksgiving since Sophie passed away, and obviously if you're on Facebook, you get these Facebook memories pop up, and she is great at pointing out the highlights, the great memories they've had in the past, but also that it brings sadness when you see the happy smiling face from 3 years ago. It reminds you that Sophie's not there anymore, and that's been a hard year, hard couple of years. And I was looking back through, because Bonnie, again, mentioned that what an example of lament, sure, but hope. We're going to transition into hope in just a moment. But I was scrolling back through her post, and I found one from December 1st. She was posting on Advent. December 1st was the first Sunday of this 4 weeks ago today. She wrote this: "My heart is so heavy, but full of hope. It feels strange to say I feel both deeply, hope and sorrow. But I do. This week will be another difficult one. The burdens of life do not lessen. But my hope also doesn't fade. I am grateful for the Spirit of God who builds hope in me." Circumstances for that, And there's been other stuff. They have a daughter in college, I think in New York, and she's had to have I forget all the details. She had to have surgery, and she needed somebody to come take care of her. So mom's now flying, not cross country, but flying to New York to take care of her college-age daughter. And you still have other kids at home that need taken care of, and dad's working, and life's hard. Life keeps going, and there's still going to be hardship, but she's able to find hope in God. Not hope in human circumstances, because humanly it's horrible. I can't fathom losing a child in that way. But there's hope. Verse 21. So again, 19 and 20, I'm living in this deep bitterness, I'm deflated, I'm humbled by life and the circumstances of life and all that we're going through. 21. This I recall to my mind, therefore have I hope. Hope's on the way. I recall God's faithfulness. I recall who God is, therefore I have hope. Only reason we can have hope. And that leads to the next several verses that talk about why we can have hope. Verse 22, and we'll read 22 and 23. It is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed, because his compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. Great is thy faithfulness. Now we're finding the hymn, some of the lyrics of the hymn hidden in these verses. But verse 22 talks about a steadfast God. In the ESV translation, verse 22 starts quite differently. It says, the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. It never stops. It is steady. Something that's steadfast is firm. It is solid. In Word of Life, for many years, we've had an award called the Steadfast Award for children that kind of earn the gold level every year of Olympians, first grade, second grade, they're all the way through sixth. They're working hard. They've done hard work for 6 years. They're steady. You can't get even silver one year. You got to get the gold level every year to get the Steadfast Award. You're steady. You're firm. Something that's steadfast, doesn't waver, doesn't move. It is steadfast. What is steady about God? What never ends? These verses tell us several things. His steadfast love, his steadfast mercy, and his steadfast faithfulness in those verses. It is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed, because his compassion or love never fails. It never ends. It is steadfast. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. God's faithfulness is steadfast as well. And the steadfast love in verse 22 is compassion that doesn't fail, that is steadfast. It is the word in Hebrew, hesed. It's a loyal, faithful love. It is not going to change. It is committed. It is faithful. It is firm. Even though there was judgment from God. Throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament, we read over and over again about God judging his people, but he does it out of love. It's like a parent in all good faithfulness disciplining their child. They do it because they want their child to honor God more. They want their child to live a more obedient life, not because they hate their child, not because they're mad at their child. If they're doing it right, it is out of love. Even though there was judgment from God due to their sin, and we said over and over again, he still loved them. It was always to bring them back. The discipline was always meant to bring them back to faithfulness, bring them back to a right relationship with him. Again, from this commentary, the judgment itself, and a horrible judgment, to be attacked and to be taken over by this foreign nation, the judgment itself was a witness to the fact that God had not abandoned his people. If he didn't care anymore, if God had just abandoned Israel, he would have just abandoned Israel. He would have just said, forget it. They can just do their own thing. I will leave them alone, leave them to their own sinful decisions. But because he loved them, he disciplined them. That's a sign of God's love. He had not abandoned his people. It says there in verse 22, it is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed. Consume, we talk maybe consume, meaning eat something, but I think it's more pointing to the fact of like lighting a match under something and it burns up. A piece of paper just is consumed pretty quickly and you're left with just a little bit of ash behind. That's all that's left. It is of the Lord's mercies. We're not burned up. We're not consumed. We're not taken out of the picture. It's all because of God's mercy. God's faithfulness, God's love. There's no other reason. It's not our good deeds. It's not our good intentions. It's not our nice smile and nice personality. It's because of God's mercy. That's it. There's nothing else. There is nothing good in me good enough in me to earn God's favor. It's only because he is merciful. He is holding back the judgment that I deserve and giving me mercy, giving me faithfulness, love, compassion. His mercies, or compassion as it says there in different translations, showed his gentle feeling of concern for those who belong to him, gently loving them. And because of that, allowing punishment to come into their into their world to bring them back to faithfulness. Again, it says there in 23, they're new every morning. That brings to mind the manna in the wilderness. And if we're familiar with that story from the book of Exodus, as Israel, the people of Israel, the children of Israel they'd left slavery in Egypt, and they're heading towards the promised land, and they're starving, and they complain to God, we don't have anything to eat, and so God brings manna every morning. Exactly what they needed. It wasn't too much. It was, they would go out with their jars, they'd gather it, it tasted like honey wafers, it was great, but it was new every morning. It didn't last for tomorrow. If they tried to keep it, it went bad, it went rotten, and worms got into it. It was just perfect. And the next day there'd be more. 6 days, and then on Saturday they got enough for 2 days. Or Friday they got enough for Friday and Saturday. And it was a daily provision. It's new every morning. We get new mercy every morning from God. Exactly what we need. He gives us exactly what we need to have. They're new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. Great. Great. It speaks to quality. Something is great. But it also speaks to quantity. Great. In abundance. God's faithfulness is overflowing to us. It's more than we need. A huge amount. We have need of nothing else. It's just pouring out over onto us. Great is your faithfulness. Moving on to read verse 24. The Lord is my portion, saith my soul. Therefore will I hope in him. The Lord is our portion. I had to dig into this a little bit to understand portion. Saying you cut something into portions and all that. Well, actually, it is kind of what it's talking about. If you go back again to the people of Israel, earlier in the Old Testament, is when they got into the promised land, the different tribes were given their areas, each of the 12 tribes. And then inside the tribes, different families were given their portion. They were cut, the land was cut into different pieces of property, all subdivided up. This is for this family clan, and this piece is for this family clan, and all that. And that was your portion. Your family would live in this area, you'd farm it, or do whatever. And the Lord, that provision, that portion, was your provision. That's how you survived. The land you were given was how you made it. Well, the priestly tribe, the Levites, they weren't given any portion, actually. They had portions all throughout, and basically the idea was the Lord is your provision. And through the offerings given to the temple, the Levites were provided for. And they were given food, and they, again, received money because of the kind of the temple tax and money given to the temple, or the tabernacle before that. They were provided for. And they would say, all the way back in the book of Numbers 18:20, the Lord is my portion. We don't need a piece of land to be our provision, to provide for us, because God provides for us. And now in the book of Lamentations, saying the same thing. The Lord is my portion. God gives me what I need. He is our portion. We have hope because he's providing for us. He is all we need. We have hope. Hope in spite of our circumstances, in spite of the cut and pay, in spite of the bad test results, in spite of the hard conversation we've had to have with a family member or a coworker. We have hope. God is our portion. He's given us what we need. He is our provision. He is our hope. The mercy that we receive from him, he is all we need. And how do we do that? How do we live that out? How do we, again, Jordan, that all sounds good. I understand intellectually, but how do I, tomorrow morning, how do I do that? How do I live in hope? How do I look past the hardship of this past year, maybe more than a year. Verse 25. We'll read all the way from 25 to 27. The Lord is good unto them that wait for him, to the soul that seeketh him. It is good that a man should both hope and quietly wait for the salvation of the Lord. It is good for a man that he bear the yoke in his youth. Side little point. This book of Lamentations is written in, I forget the name of it, but like the first verse starts with the Hebrew letter A. It's not A. The second verse starts with the Hebrew letter B. I don't know my Hebrew letters. And then chapter 3 is the only one that's different. If you notice, chapter 1, 2, 4, and 5, they're all 22 verses. And then chapter 3 is 66 verses. So it's triple. There's first 3 verses start with A. The 4, 5, and 6 start with B. Again, not in our English language, but in Hebrew. And verses 25, 26, and 27 all start with the word good. Again, not in the English Bible, but in the Hebrew Bible start with the word, a Hebrew word for good. Good is the Lord unto them. And then good it is that a man, and good for a man, that it's pointing out these are all good things. The Lord, verse 25, the Lord is good unto them that wait for him, to the soul that seeketh him. Answer, to put it very simply, is to wait on the Lord and seek the Lord. It says it's good. The Lord is good to the person that does those things. But what do these mean? Well, verse 26 even gives a little, it says even, verse 25 says to wait for him. Verse 26 says quietly wait, even a little more specifically. So quietly wait. That's hard. We're people that like try to find answers and just do, or look to somebody else. But just the idea of quietly waiting, that's hard. Waiting's hard. Quietly waiting's harder. It takes faith to sit quietly knowing that the answer's coming. Because we want to do something. We want to manufacture a solution. We want to have the answer. We want to say the perfect thing. But God's saying, quietly wait. It is good that a man should both hope and quietly wait. Salvation's on its way. The good, the hope is on its way. You just have to quietly wait. If we truly have confidence that God loves us and cares for us more than we could imagine, if we have confidence that God has a plan in the midst of this suffering, that there's something good that can come out of it, if we have faith in that, confidence in that, He will give us the ability to quietly wait for that answer to come, for the hope to come. And it's hard. And the idea, even just maybe beside the idea of waiting, the idea of quiet. I don't like quiet. My wife said, do you have, and my wife and my son, me and my son, does it always have to have something, does it always have to be a show on? Does there always have to be something in the background? Can you just, sit and quiet a little bit? It's hard. I don't like quiet. Quietly wait. Psalm 39:9 says, I was dumb, and not dumb that way, dumb as in mute, dumb as in not speaking. I was dumb, I was mute, I opened not my mouth, because thou didst it. God, you've put me in this situation, so I'm going to quietly wait. And then secondly, seek the Lord. Back to verse 25 said, the Lord is good unto them that wait for him, to the soul that seeketh him. We have to seek the Lord. And again, seek the Lord it sounds good. It sounds like a bumper sticker or something that's on the front of a Bible cover. But what does it mean to actually seek the Lord? Seek his presence, seek his face, be near him, be with him. And you might go, God is always with us. And that is true in a couple ways. God is with us in the sense of God is faithfully here. God has never left us. God never leaves us. And even secondly, in an even more like theological sense, God is omnipresent, meaning not always, everywhere present. God is everywhere. So yes, we don't need to seek the presence of the Lord in that sense, but we abandon him. We move away from him. We often stray from our God, and we need to seek after him. We need to move towards him. It's, as I was reading up on seeking the Lord, reading an article about it, it brought up this idea. It's a setting of the mind and heart on God. The mind and heart. It's our intellect We need to move toward, we need to be in his word. We need to spend time with God. But also our heart needs to be moved. 1 Chronicles 22:19 says, now set your heart or mind, again, different translations say it differently, but now set your heart or mind and your soul, your heart and mind, both in there, to seek the Lord your God. Arise, therefore, and build ye the sanctuary. And it gives them this task, talking about building the temple. But it's moving towards God is about setting your heart and setting your mind on God. This article I was reading was from Desiring God, John Piper's ministry, if you're familiar. I love this way he said this. The setting of the mind, or this seeking God's face, the setting of the mind is the opposite of mental coasting. It's not mental coasting. It's not just, you can go down a hill in your car, you can just put it in neutral and just coast down the hill, or on a bike, one of the best feelings in the world, just coasting down a hill on a bicycle. It's not mental coasting. It's a conscious choice to direct the heart towards God. It's a choice. It's a conscious choice. It's active. Again, we like to think of this kind of spiritual, just sit here and I'll be blessed and God will, kind of zap me with everything. No, we have to pursue if we're going to seek the Lord. So wait on the Lord and seek the Lord. Micah 7:7. Therefore, I will look unto the Lord. I will wait for the God of my salvation. My God will hear me. I think that verse really wraps up both the waiting on the Lord, quietly waiting on the Lord, and seeking the Lord. Therefore, I will look to the Lord. I'm going to wait. I will wait for the God of my salvation. My God will hear me. I'm active. I'm pursuing God. I'm talking to God. It says, my God will hear me, but I'm also waiting. It's both. And lastly, last verse we're going to read this morning, verse 27. It is good for a man that he bear the yoke in his youth. And I really struggle with this verse because there's a whole lot of people saying a whole lot of different things about this verse. But I think we can boil it down to this. The suffering is coming. Imagine, again, back to the context of this, that the city's being surrounded for some time period. It's being attacked. They're constantly, hitting up against the wall, trying to break down the gates and to get into your city that you've lived in for a number of years. And the suffering is coming. You know it is. They break down the walls. They take you captive. They would have literally at times, it's said of the Babylonians that they would have actually put people, if you picture like the yoke that would be over two oxes' shoulders, they would have even put people in the yoke and used them as slave labor and manual labor to pull something, to pull a cart or to grind wheat or whatever. So to use this picture of a yoke, it is good for a man that he bear the yoke in his youth. The suffering is coming, but push through it. Make it through it. The idea, again, some different commentaries I read talk about the idea of it was the young people that made it through to the end because they would have been in exile for a number of years. The older people wouldn't have made it. They would have died in exile. They would have died in Babylon or died, out in the outskirts. It was only the young people that actually made it, had the opportunity to make it back. I'm not sure if that's entirely what it means. But it's better to start the suffering when you're young so you can make it through to the end. Stand up under the suffering. Again, the suffering's coming. We can't control that all the time. And sometimes it's a result of our bad decisions, but it's coming. So are we going to try to shirk it? Are we going to try to get away from it? Or are we going to stand up and make it through? Stand up under the suffering, allowing yourself to learn the lessons that God has for you. In the bad times, in the hardship that we're going through. Again, whether it's a result of our actions or not, what is God trying to teach us? It's better to try and learn the lessons than to try to get out from under the yoke at that point. Learn what God has for us. Again, picture the actual suffering of these Israelites. Taken away from their nation, subjugated by the Babylonians, made into slave labor, many of them, if nothing else, at least taken away from their homeland, working like animals. But there's lessons to be learned. There's something good to come out of that. It is good for a man that he bear the yoke in his youth, to serve God, to learn the lessons that God has for us. A couple things as we wrap up, a couple things in conclusion I want to think about, or I want to point out. Some of these we know, maybe, and some of this will be, like I said, a recall. Number one, God keeps his promises. I think we just need to be reminded of that over and over and over again. God is a promise-keeping God. one last quote, I think one last quote from this commentary that I was reading. God had warned of the fearful consequences of disobedience. God had warned them over and over again. Okay, if you know, Isaiah had prophesied to them for years. Now Jeremiah had prophesied to them for years. Nobody listened to Jeremiah. Nobody. He'd warned them of the fearful consequences of disobedience, and as Jeremiah carefully noted, God faithfully carried out those curses. God said the punishment was coming, and now the punishment came. Yet, this characteristic makes the book of Lamentations a book of hope for Israel. God was faithful in discharging every aspect of the covenant he made. God made promises. He was going to stick with his promises. Even though Israel failed, even though Israel had fallen away, fallen into idol worship, fallen into disobedience, God was going to keep his promises. That's a source of hope. We can mess up. We do wrong things. At times, God has to punish us to bring us back. But that doesn't affect God's promises. God is still a promise keeper, a promise holder. He's not changing. He will keep his promises. It's hard to remember this sometimes. Because again, we like to measure them in the sense of like our human relationships, where if we continually hurt somebody, eventually they're going to leave us. It happens in the most strongest of relationships, like a marriage relationship should be the thing that's closest to our relationship to God, but even those fall apart. But God keeps his promises. It's hard to live this out in real life, but we have to remember it, deeply remember it, and believe it. God keeps his promises. He always has. He always will. Second thing I want to point out, back to the quietly wait and seek the Lord. It's easier said than done, all this is. But we can't sit in neutral. We have to actively pursue God with our mind and our heart. And waiting doesn't come naturally. It's going to have to be something we work at. I got the idea of this sermon. I was actually looking, I was like, what am I going to preach? It's the last Sunday of the year. It's kind of a unique Sunday. It's not necessarily preaching on Christmas anymore. And I looked up sermons for the beginning of a new year, because I know this is the last of a year, but it kind of rolls over into the next time we'll be in church together, well, other than maybe New Year's Eve, is going to be the 1st of 2025. And I found I don't know if any of you are familiar with a man named Ray Pritchard. He speaks at Word of Life a lot. I think he speaks at Keswick, doesn't he? Yeah. Great traveling preacher, former pastor, but now he just preaches at camps and conference centers and stuff like that. And he has, a big old list of like 40, 50 sermons for the beginning of a new year. And I was looking through some of them, and I found the story about the hymn writer and all that from that. But in the midst of his sermon, I did not preach. I didn't just copy and paste the sermon. But he wrapped up his message with 4 questions. And then the response, coming back from verses 22 and 23 are the responses. And I'm just going to wrap up with that, and then we'll close in a word of prayer. His question 1, why doesn't God destroy me? Answer these are all from verses 22 and 23. Why doesn't God destroy me? Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed. It's God's love, not because of me. Number 2, how do I know God will keep on loving me? For his compassions never fail. When will God give me what I need? They are new every morning. We have to get a daily supply from God. And then question 4, what is my hope for the future? Our only hope for the future. Like I said, with that we'll wrap up and I'll pray. What is my hope for the future? Great is your faithfulness. I have no other hope except for the faithfulness of God. If he somehow could be unfaithful, our whole world would fall apart. But great is thy faithfulness. Let's pray. Dear God, thank you for time together this morning. Thank you for this passage. In the midst of a book full of sorrow, full of sadness, full of suffering, there are these verses of hope, this chapter of hope. And I know we all can look back at this last year and look at things we didn't like. We can look at things that weren't fun, that we lived through. Maybe we made through it in good spirits, maybe we didn't. But God, there is hope. There's hope for better things to come. There's a hope of eternity. If we've trusted you as our Savior, there's hope of a future in heaven with you. But there's even hope in this world. There's hope for better days to come. There's hope that we are learning things through this experience, these experiences that we're living through. But God, we only can have hope because of your faithfulness. This new mercy we receive every morning. We receive the mercy that we need to make it through that day. God, help us to remember that. Help us to quietly wait for you. Help us to seek after you. Pursue you with our whole heart. Not just sit and wait for, to be spiritually zapped, but to chase after you. You're there. You're waiting with open arms for us, but help us to chase after you, pursue a stronger relationship with you. And that we would just fully lean on your grace, on your mercy, on your love, that steadfast love that you have for us. I thank you so much for it. The love that we do not deserve, and mercy, grace that we do not deserve. We're so thankful for it. I pray this in your name.